Hello everyone, I'm Corey and we're talking Manpower. Today I'm with Mr. Aronowitz. He's a retired SES and Deputy Assistant Chief of Staff for G1 for civilian personnel. He retired in August 2015. Mr. Aronowitz, thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate you coming out of retirement to speak with me.
Thank you very much, Corey. I absolutely look forward to the opportunity to speak to you and the careerist.
So, I want to talk a little bit about your career path. So tell me about it.
Well, I started in federal government in 1982, coming out of graduate school, and I came in through the Presidential Management Intern Program, which is now the President Management Fellows Program. I came in Career Program 11 and was initially doing organizational studies and analysis. I started at headquarters CID, which was in Falls Church, Virginia. And having come out of graduate school and having taken some quantitative backgrounds, I was asked to participate in a study to build basically manpower standards for criminal investigators. Really, the senior guy on the team saw some of the abilities that I had in the quantitative area and quickly pushed me in front of senior leaders to present a lot of the material and the analysis that we had done, and that was really my first exposure to senior leaders in the Army and in federal government. After about 4 years at CID, I moved on to headquarters AMC. Spent about 18 months there. Got into Manpower Staffing Standards, the MS3 program. Which was also establishing staffing standards for different functional areas within the Army. And then from AMC, had the opportunity to go overseas into a programming job, which was back in CP11, where I first got exposed to the program and budget process in the Army. Again, at a very low level. This was not at the Army command level, but at a subordinate command level. Within the organization in Europe, the 21st Theater Army Area Command, I had about 5 different assignments in 3 different organizations within the command. So I moved around over those 10 years and was promoted twice. And really it was in Germany that I got my first management job as a GS-14 division chief in the Manpower Force Management area. From there, I had a mentor who really encouraged me to take a development assignment back to the States, which was in the mid-90s. And after I returned from that development assignment, which was a year, the same mentor really pushed me and encouraged me to apply to the Army War College, which I did, and went to the Army War College as a resident student in the 98-99 time frame. And I kind of look back on that period as really key in my personal growth and development in terms of really having a mentor for the first time, understanding how important this individual would be in my career path and career growth. Also at the War College, the individuals coming in are primarily lieutenant colonels. There are a few colonels, but at the time there were lieutenant colonels such as John Campbell, who was the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army and is now the commander of Allied forces in Afghanistan. Getting retired. Lieutenant Colonel Dennis Vi, at the time, now General Vi, 4-star commander at AMC, and a number of other general officers and senior civilians at these courses. And so I started to really understand how important relationships were, because these lieutenant colonels were coming in and had gone through a lot of courses together themselves, whether it was at the captain's level at CASCube at the time or CGSC. And so by the time they got to the War College, they had already had 15 years of relationship building amongst themselves. And as a civilian, we don't have that. And so I started to pick up on the things that were really important to leadership, at least within the Army and the DoD structure. From the War College, I became a division chief at the Manpower Analysis Agency out at Fort Belvoir, and was ultimately selected to become director of the of the Manpower Analysis Agency at Belvoir. While I was out as the director of the Manpower Analysis Agency, the ASA MNRA asked me to lead a study of diversity in the Army. And my first thought was that, well, gee, that's not what the Manpower Analysis Agency does. We do manpower studies. But understanding that you don't tell your boss no, I led a team of about 6 analysts in doing the study and spoke to commanders and civilian executive directors across the Army, went out to academia and private industry to talk about diversity and what it really looks like, and presented our team's findings to the Chief of Staff of the Army and also to the Undersecretary of the Army, and that project really became the foundation for the Army's diversity roadmap. As a result of that study, the ASA MNRA asked me to serve temporarily as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for EEO and Civil Rights. And again, I had never had an EEO job before in my career. And when I spoke to him about my concerns, again, I was a GS-15 at the time, and this was an SES billet. He said, Jay, I understand that I'm not putting you there for any of your technical abilities. I'm putting you there for your leadership and insight. And so again, another point, an inflection point in my career in terms of understanding, okay, so what does it really mean to be a leader? What do you need to know? What are the expectations of those above you in terms of your competencies and capabilities going into leadership positions? From that acting Deputy Assistant Secretary position, I was then asked to move into another SES billet temporarily as the acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Force Management, Manpower, and Resources, which at the time was a political billet. Career Program 26 did not have any SES billets at the time. And over about a 6-month period in acting in that position, the ASA MNRA at the time decided to move around some of his career and political SES billets in the organization. The Deputy Assistant Secretary for Force Management Manpower became a career billet, the first CP26 SES billet in the Army, and I was fortunate enough to be selected for the position. And then after about 3 years in that billet, I was asked if I would move over to become the Assistant G1 for Civilian Personnel by the Executive Resource Board, or the board that manages the allocation of SESs and the movement across functions. Again, I've never been a civilian personnelist in HR, a new career program to me. I was also going to be the functional chief representative, which meant that I'd be responsible for the professional development of about 5,000 careerists, not having come up through the ranks, which was really daunting and challenging. But it was kind of, when I say those two positions, not just being the pinnacle of my career, but really challenged me and really stretched me, in particular working at this level in the Pentagon. So again, looking back at my career path, I don't want to say that it's not a common or an uncommon career path. A lot of it was not planned or by design. It was a question of being at the right place at the right time, having some great mentors throughout my career who helped me make decisions on what jobs I should consider going into. The career path and career development today is a lot different than when I came in. We have the Army Civilian Training, Education, Development, the ACTEDS plans that are developed, which really lay out a clear career map or career path for individuals who really aspire to be senior leaders.
So it seems to me that you've done positions in the comptroller and manpower, force management, and HR. So when you look back in your career and as a much younger person, was being an SES in the federal government something that you walked in day one and said, I want to do this? Or did it kind of just happen, during the course of your career, or is that something you set out long-term goal when you walked in day one?
Well, it was probably about fifth year of federal service that I said, gee, I'm going to make a career of this. I'm going to stay a federal employee, because when I came in, no one in my family had ever worked for the federal government. So, I don't want to say that, there was no aspirations or anything like that. But when I first came in, no, I mean, I didn't know that much about the federal government. As I mentioned, our onboarding, 30 years ago was horrible. We didn't have act heads plans. And so no one sat down with me in the first few years of my career and said, Jay, what do you want to do? Where do you see yourself 3 to 5, 7 to 10 years from now? And this is what you're going to need to do to get it. I mean, again, we've provided a career of some fantastic tools today to allow them to really shoot for as high as they want to go in their career, and so they'll know what they need to do. There were no SES billets in CP26, again, up until, around 2010 or so. So I can't say that I aspired to be an SES. I know that I wanted to go as far as I could. I knew that if I wanted to be at the 14, 15 level, that the opportunities were here in the DC area, and so I spent the last few years here in Washington, and then when the opportunity came up to apply for an SES billet, I decided to put my name in the hat, so to speak. There's a lot of administrative work that you've got to do in preparation to applying for SES positions. But again, everyone should aspire to as high as they desire to be.
Well, in your opinion, what's the role of a manpower analyst in the Army?
Well, the key role that manpower analysts provide is information and analysis to leaders at whatever level they're at, unbiased information and analysis to help those leaders make informed resource decisions. There are 9 functional areas within NCP26, and whether you're dealing with equipment or organizational structure or manpower requirements, it really is about information and analysis, and really providing leaders courses of action, pros, cons, risk assessment, and then having the leaders make informed decisions based on that, plus other information that they'll get.
So you recently spoke to some interns at the CP26 orientation, the intern orientation. Why was it important for you to come and speak to these interns, even though now that you're retired?
Well, as I've mentioned to others, when you get to this point in your life, it really is about giving back. And again, I mentioned that there was a real paucity of tools that were out there when I came into federal government. And so as I talked to the intern group, and I talked to other groups outside of Army, first of all, it's important to understand that there are tools available, what tools or where to go to find these tools. And then, the other things that I've talked to the group about are things that really are going to help their career move forward. What are some of the intangible things that they need to be aware of? What's really important in the federal government? I know a lot of them are veterans, and so they probably have a few years to many years coming up through the military system, and it is a little bit different on the civilian side. I mean, we all are supporting soldiers. We all are supporting families. We're trying to make our installations as best as possible for both the soldiers, the civilian, or the family members, and the civilians that are working there. But to let them know on the civilian side what's important, what are those intangibles that they are really going to have to master in order to move forward in their career. And then what are the attributes of being a good leader?
So you've touched on this a little earlier, but you talked about you having positions as a comptroller and as a manpower analyst and as an HR guy. How did those positions kind of prepare you in conjunction with the leaders that you talked about that had gone to the War College and things like that, and having been exposed very early on to these leaders? How did all that kind of prepare you to be an SES?
That's a great question, Corey. What it really helped me understand is that whatever issue that you're going to be involved in, and again, whether it's at the installation level, Army command level, Army Service Component command level, or headquarters DA, is that there are always going to be many stakeholders. And these stakeholders have, first of all, a different view of your world, whether it's manpower or personnel or resource management, financial management. And so as I moved across both CP 2611, CP 10 with personnel, it's given me, it's afforded me the opportunity to understand the different viewpoints of these different communities. And at the end of the day, we've got to all work together to solve some pretty complex problems. And as I moved up in my career, it really was about working with these other individuals in these other functional communities to really get to a win-win, where everyone could feel that they've contributed to solving a problem, and that their interests are represented in whatever that outcome may be.
Do you think, having had these positions, as HR, as a comptroller, as a manpower analyst, they gave you, obviously a wider purview, but do you think that helped you in your decision-making process because you understood if I make a decision for, program X and manpower, it's going to affect Y and Z in these other two, and vice versa?
Absolutely. Especially when you understand that the most expensive component of the Army, because the Army is people, is HR. It's our resources, it's our soldiers, our civilians, and our contract workforce. And so, again, as I moved up particularly in force management, and then having been in resource and worked the program and budget side, understanding that as we talk about these three components of manpower, soldiers, civilians, and contractors, and we start talking about the capabilities that we want in our Army, that there's a lot of trade-off analysis across these different groups, and they all come with different cost factors. And so, having moved across HR, doing program budget, manpower, and also personnel, it helped me really tie these together. And it's nothing that's really unique to just me. I can absolutely say that over the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years, I've seen those communities work much closer together. Prior to that, we were very stovepiped. And manpower folks didn't talk to personnelists, and personnelists didn't talk to finance folks. But over the last 5 to 7 years, I've really seen these communities come together to solve some of the complex challenges that we have in the Army, and they work much closer together. And there's a lot more collaboration across those functional communities.
Has your view of a manpower analyst changed now that you're retired and you're not kind of in the wars every day, so to speak? If there's been any change, it's to realize how important manpower and manpower analysts are, again, to solving the challenges that we have today, and we're going to have, over the next, several iterations of the POM process. There are constraints on the size of the Army. And so again, as I talked about the trade-offs between soldiers, civilians, and contractors, and capabilities, again, how can we maximize the capability that we can provide our leaders and combatant commanders with those capabilities and those workforces, given the constraints that we have? And so it is about the manpower analysts doing the analytical work and the underpinnings behind
the COAs, the courses of action to provide leaders, working with our financial management community personnel and CP11, and also along with the civilian side of the house with regard to flexibilities. We need much more flexibility with regard to our civilian workforce going forward. So again, it's an increased appreciation for how important manpower analysts are for solving the challenges that we're going to have going forward.
So let's focus a little bit on leadership and mentorship. I know that you're a big proponent of both of them. And you spoke in the previous segment about mentorship. So what's your idea? What is your idea of mentorship, and what makes a good mentor?
Well, first of all, as I mentioned, mentors are absolutely essential with regard to helping develop folks and provide them wisdom and guidance with regard to their career. What constitutes a good mentor? I've had several mentors throughout my career. They've all been informal. I've never participated in a formal mentorship program. And these were individuals who either approached me or I approached with regard to the mentorship relationship. And for those who approached me, for whatever reason, it's something that they saw within me. And thought that I could be challenged and do more than what I was doing at the time, and so recommended that one, I volunteer for projects that they were aware of that were coming up, or recommended that I seek a developmental opportunity with a organization or team that again they thought would help to and develop me. And also just provide guidance with regard to decisions to make that would impact my career. And so the relationship was a little bit flipped with regard to them being a little bit more proactive in my own development than even I was at the time. For those that I sought out, they were typically leaders who I had a lot of respect for with regard to their leadership style, their ability to form wonderful teams, great teams, and how they really treated their individuals, their employees. And so I approached several of these over the course of my career and just asked them would they consider being a mentor. And in all cases, they accepted to do so. What makes a good mentor? Again, it's someone who can see within you that you've got abilities beyond where you're at today, and really seek to put you in a position of being challenged and move up, acquiring new skills. Someone who really has your best interest. And again, because it was an informal relationship, it was more easier because it wasn't a forced relationship.
Is a mentor then somebody that'll give you kind of like honest and frank advice and kind of listen rather than just saying kind of what you want to hear? Like, for instance, if you give a bad briefing and you go to them and say, how can I improve my briefing skills? And you're a notoriously bad briefer, but they're just saying, oh well, no, you're doing okay. Is a mentor somebody that's going to give you that kind of frank advice that might kind of go against kind of what you think sometimes?
That is exactly the type of mentor that you want. And in my case, and I think in most cases, that's exactly what you get. I know that there are some folks who seek to have an individual in their chain of command to be their mentor, or somebody outside the chain of command, and that's really the first decision that you've got to make, whether you think that the relationship can work within your rating chain or not.
So let's switch gears here a little bit and talk about leadership. What is your leadership philosophy?
Well, my leadership philosophy is fairly straightforward. It's to be authentic, be approachable, develop the talent that is entrusted to you, and to always seek a win-win in every challenge or issue that you're working.
In that developing talent piece, is that kind of even developing the talent, even if you know that, let's say you've got somebody who does a very, very good job, but you see a lot of potential in them, is that sometimes encouraging them to move on, even though it might hurt your organization that you were leading in the short term, because you know that they're going to go on and they're going to develop and they're going to be able to progress in their career?
That is a key requirement of being a leader, is developing your talent. And I have to tell you that every one of my employees that has left my organization and moved on, sometimes for a lateral to pick up a new skill set or promotion, that tells me that I did my job as leader, because it really is about preparing individuals to continue to move up in their career. It's not about you as an individual. It's not about necessarily the organization. I know that's a tough thing to hear, but it is about developing your employees. And let me talk about just one in particular who will remain anonymous. But I brought this individual into my organization in Washington as a GS-12. She was the lowest ranking individual by grade in the organization, but she had a skill set that I thought was essential to develop and grow and to move the organization to the next level. We sent this individual off to get a master's degree, so she was out of the organization for 18 months. She was promoted twice. She left my organization to work somewhere else, and then was selected for senior service college, but came back to work for me in the subsequent organization that I was in. And so I was able to grow and develop this talent to see it move on, to help move her career further along. And then she ended up coming back to work for me as a GS-15 to help to continue to develop and grow the organization that I was in at the time. And so you've got to understand that this is an Army resource. It's not my resource, or it's not the organization's resource. So it is about developing the talent that is entrusted to you.
So what constitutes a good leader in your mind?
Really, being a good leader is about putting out a vision to the organization and communicating it. And when I talk about communication, Corey, as a senior leader, I think the key element of communication is the ability to listen to your staff and to really understand what's going on in the organization. And so communication is key. Having a vision, motivating individuals, inspiring individuals, developing individuals. All of those are really key and essential to being a good leader. Also, to be inclusive and to make sure that all the voices are heard within the organization. When I talked about this individual I brought in to the organization as GS-12, she was in an occupation series that was different than what was in the organization. At the time, we had all 343 management analysts. And so this individual came in with a completely different view of the world and a completely different skill set. And so she helped some of the leaders within the organization start to challenge some of our own beliefs about some of the underpinnings within the organization, and made us much better leaders. And so it is about getting some diversity in the organization and being inclusive and making sure that everyone's voice is heard.
So what is the difference then between a good leader and a bad leader, and can you learn from both types?
Well, again, a bad leader is kind of the antithesis of a good leader, and some of the skill sets that I mentioned. There's always a little bit of a nuance, and sometimes it's when I say small things, I remember as a manager one time I had a leader who set up his desk so that his computer, his back would be to the door as he worked at the computer. And so, you would knock on the door when you wanted to engage with him, and he would just say, "What?" And he would never turn around and make eye contact with you. And you would have a conversation with this leader, but he would never look at you. It's always, towards his back. And so I always said, gee, as I move up as a senior leader, I will never turn my back, have my back positioned in the office where I can't, make eye contact and have a dialogue with my staff. And so there are just even some of these small nuanced things within our day-to-day work environment that we have with our staff and employees and between each other that as you move up, you start to say, gee, these are the things that I've liked about some of my leaders. And these are the things that I haven't liked about my leaders. And obviously build upon those attributes that you've seen as positive.
I know we spoke a little bit about this in our previous interview, that you were around kind of leaders from kind of the first time you got into the federal government. Very early on in your career, you were going to meetings and you were interacting with these kind of senior leaders and things like that. Do you think that helped you develop your kind of leadership style, and what kind did you take away when you were kind of in the room with those type of leaders?
It absolutely did, Corey. And I think what I gained an appreciation for most was the communication that goes on at different levels of leadership. In other words, when I'm talking to my division chief and the information that I provide to my division chief, it's much different than the information that I provide to senior leaders and the communication style that I have with senior leaders. Number of reasons behind that. First of all, the amount of time that leaders have available as you start to move up the chain. They have less and less time to sit down and actually work through whatever you may be a subject matter expert on. And so it's understanding that you've got to tailor the information. You've got to understand and know the leadership's style for receiving information, and it varies. Some leaders, like a lot of narrative information in briefings, and others are much more comfortable seeing graphs, bar graphs, pie charts, things of that nature. And so it's knowing the communication style of the senior leader. And so as I moved up in my career, I had to be cognizant of how to tailor the information and present it to senior leaders. And also understand that they have access to information that impacts on whatever the issue is that I don't. And so I always did try and reach out to other stakeholders that I thought would be impacted by the issue to understand their position and incorporate that in the information that I presented. And again, understanding that as you move up the chain of leadership, that they do have access to other information that would impact their final decision.
So it kind of seems to me that developing talking to senior leaders and talking, knowing your audience, so to speak, is kind of a skill in and of itself. You have to kind of develop that and know and kind of know what your immediate boss is and what their boss what type of information they want, and then knowing your kind of audience when you're briefing it. Does that hold true?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what would your advice be to someone who wants to build and develop their leadership skills?
Well, first of all, you really need to seek to challenge yourself wherever you're at organizationally. If you aspire to be a branch chief, sit down and talk to a branch chief. It could be yours today or others, and say, what are the challenges that you have at your level? What did it take for you to get to your level? What are their experiences with regard to their interaction with, say, the division chief or those above them? Seek out developmental opportunities. The Army, through the Senior Executive Talent Management, Enterprise Talent Management, and Emerging Leaders Program, have some great developmental opportunities out there. But that doesn't mean that anyone or organization should be constrained by those developmental opportunities. So I would really encourage individuals to seek out establishing development opportunities, to work on projects that are going to stretch them. What you really want to do as you seek to be a leader is to be stretched, to be challenged, to pick up new skills. to be exposed to meetings of senior leaders. So part of it should be working on a team or project that's going to present information to a senior leader, to understand the dynamics of the organization and the leaders within that organization.
Well, that's a lot for me. A lot for me to take and a lot for me to ponder. Mr. Aronowitz, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming out of retirement. I know the Pentagon doesn't seem like a foreign place to you, but it's good to have you back in for today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Corey.
Well, everyone, that does it for this segment. We look forward to our next segment next week. In the meantime, feel free to like us on Facebook, which is facebook.com/ArmyCP26. And until next time, have a great Army Day.